Something just happened in American airspace and in the skies over the Middle East that most people scrolled right past, and you need to understand what it actually means. The U.S. Navy quietly deployed its E-6B Mercury, the aircraft the Pentagon calls a Doomsday Plane, to the Middle East in early March 2026. And on March 8th, one was spotted circling California's Central Valley for nearly 2 hours. This aircraft is specifically designed to maintain a no-fail communication link between the president and the nation's nuclear triad, particularly submerged ballistic missile submarines hiding silently beneath the ocean. These planes operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, providing what military planners describe as an unbreakable connection between civilian leadership and America's land-based missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and strategic bombers. Now, here is what you have to hold on to. The deployment to the Middle East, first detected around early March 2026 through open-source flight tracking, is happening directly against the backdrop of ongoing U.S. military operations and a heightened standoff with Iran under the Trump administration. Flight tracking data has captured repeated launches of the E-6B Mercury Strategic Airborne Command aircraft since U.S. military operations against Iran began on February 28th. This is not a drill. This is not routine. This is the United States government putting its nuclear command infrastructure in the air. And the question every American deserves a straight answer to is, why right now and what comes next? Let's go back to the very beginning of all this, because you cannot understand the Doomsday Plane flying over the Persian Gulf without understanding the full chain of events that got us here. And that chain goes back further than most people want to admit. For years, the United States and Iran had been dancing around each other in what diplomats call a strategic ambiguity. Iran was enriching uranium. The Trump administration had pulled out of the 2015 nuclear deal years ago during Trump's first term, and since then, every attempt to rebuild a negotiated framework had either stalled, collapsed, or been overtaken by something more explosive. By January of 2026, something had shifted fundamentally. Massive nationwide anti-government protests had erupted inside Iran, driven by economic collapse, the destruction of the Iranian rial, and skyrocketing prices. The Iranian government responded the way it always responds to its own people, with brutal force. Iranian security forces killed thousands of protesters during the largest protests since the Islamic Revolution, and the Trump White House was watching all of this very carefully. What happened next is one of the most significant sequences of events in modern American foreign policy history, and it happened fast. On January 2nd, Trump threatened a lock-and-loaded military intervention in Iran if the government decided to kill peaceful protesters. Then, on January 23rd, Trump announced that a U.S. armada was heading to the Middle East, including the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and several guided missile destroyers. By February 13th, he had ordered the USS Gerald R. Ford and its supporting warships to sail to the region as well. So you had two full carrier strike groups converging on the Persian Gulf. And that is not a drill, and that is not a bluff. That is the United States of America getting into position. Meanwhile, in early February, Iran and the U.S. were still holding indirect nuclear negotiations in Oman's capital, Muscat. On February 25th, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi stated that a historic opportunity to reach a nuclear agreement was within reach. He was talking about diplomacy. He was saying there was still a path. He was wrong about what was coming. On February 20th, President Trump issued a 10-day deadline for a deal, and on February 28th, following unsatisfactory results in the third round of negotiations, U.S. and Israeli strikes against Iran began. Read that again. Diplomats were in Geneva. An Omani mediator was briefing both sides on progress. Reports indicate that Iran had reportedly agreed to zero uranium stockpiling and full verification by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And then the bombs fell anyway. On February 28th, U.S. and Israeli forces launched nearly 900 strikes in 12 hours, targeting Iranian missiles, air defenses, military infrastructure, and leadership. 900 strikes in 12 hours. The operation was called Epic Fury. And the very first day of that operation, the first hours, changed the calculus of this entire conflict in a way that no one can walk back. On February 28th, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran for nearly 37 years, was assassinated. His compound was destroyed. His wife, his daughter, his son-in-law, his grandchild, all killed alongside him in the same strike. That is not a surgical removal of a military target. That is the decapitation of a government that controls one of the most volatile countries on earth. Now, here is where you need to slow down and really think about what that means, because most of the American media coverage has moved too fast past this particular moment. When you kill a sitting head of state, even one the United States despises, even one who spent decades funding terrorist proxies across the region, even one who called Israel a cancerous tumor and promoted conspiracy theories that echoed the darkest pages of Nazi ideology, when you kill him mid-war, mid-diplomacy, you unleash a succession crisis inside a nuclear-adjacent state that is already firing missiles in every direction. And that succession crisis didn't resolve itself cleanly. The IRGC pressured the Assembly of Experts to elect Mojtaba Khamenei as supreme leader with repeated contacts and psychological and political pressure. Assembly members described the atmosphere of the online meeting held under active bombardment as unnatural. Those who opposed Mojtaba's selection were given limited time to speak. Discussion was cut off. A vote was held. And then U.S. and Israeli bombs hit the Assembly of Experts office in the city of Qom, after the votes had been cast, but before the count had been completed. That is the world we are now living in. On March 8th, Iran's Assembly of Experts announced that a majority of its members voted to appoint Mojtaba Khamenei as the Islamic Republic's third supreme leader. He is 56 years old. He is the second son of the man America just killed. His wife was killed in the same strike that killed his father. His mother was killed. His sister was killed. He is described as more hardline and more conservative than his father. Trump had publicly said Mojtaba's selection would be unacceptable and even told Axios that he personally wanted to be involved in the appointment of Iran's new leader. Israel declared him a potential military target, and yet he was chosen anyway. His selection is widely seen as a clear sign that more hardline factions in Iran's establishment retain power, and could indicate that the government has little desire to agree to a deal or negotiations in the short term. This is the man who is now in charge of Iran's nuclear decisions. And here's the part that makes the Doomsday Plane deployment not just significant, but deeply alarming to people who study these things professionally. While Iran's main nuclear sites at Fordow, Isfahan, and Natanz remain in tatters after last year's U.S. strikes, Tehran still holds stock of highly enriched uranium that was reportedly moved prior to U.S. attacks. The enriched uranium is only a short technical step away from weapons-grade levels. So you have a new supreme leader who is more pro-nuclear than his assassinated father, surrounded by a revolutionary guard that has pledged its total allegiance to him, commanding a country that still has enriched uranium hidden somewhere, and that country has been under continuous bombardment for nearly 2 weeks. The Washington Institute for Near East Policy wrote that if Mojtaba becomes leader, he and the IRGC might decide Iran should move quickly to obtain nuclear weapons to deter future U.S.-Israeli attacks. That is a serious analysis from serious people. That is not a fringe theory. That is what professional strategists are actually gaming out right now. Meanwhile, the war itself is not shrinking. It is spreading. Iran has launched strikes across 9 countries in the region: Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. An Iranian drone struck a runway at a UK military base in Cyprus. Iranian missiles have targeted the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet in Bahrain's Jufair area multiple times. U.S. forces have struck more than 5,000 targets in Iran since the war began, according to U.S. Central Command. 5,000 targets. And yet, the Iranian response has not collapsed. On March 5th, a military source told Iran's Fars news agency that Iran had fired over 500 ballistic and naval missiles and almost 2,000 drones since February 28th. Most were intercepted, but not all of them. 8 American service members have been confirmed killed. And the human cost in Iran itself is staggering in ways that the American public is not fully being told. The global economic fallout is already arriving at your doorstep right now, whether you realize it or not. The 2026 Iran conflict disrupted global travel and trade, halted flights in and out of the Middle East, and led to shipping reroutes to avoid the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea. News that Iran had closed the Strait of Hormuz sent oil prices skyrocketing above $120 per barrel, their highest levels since 2022. Oil companies in Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar have begun reducing oil production because shipping traffic remains largely halted in the Strait of Hormuz. That is not just a foreign problem. That is your gas prices. That is shipping costs. That is the cost of every product that moves by ship, which is most products. The global economy is reorganizing itself around this war in real time, and it has only been 2 weeks. Now let's bring this back to that plane. It's because everything I just walked you through is the direct context for why the United States military put the E-6B Mercury into the skies over the Persian Gulf. On March 4th, 2 E-6B Mercury aircraft took off simultaneously, one from Tinker Air Force Base toward the Gulf and the other from Patuxent River toward the eastern coast of the Gulf. OSINT trackers confirmed both takeoffs. During the same week, trackers recorded 12 logistics flights crossing the Atlantic eastward, 6 KC-135 Stratotankers preparing for an Atlantic crossing, and 1 E-6B flying in a racetrack pattern over the American Midwest while the tankers moved east. That racetrack pattern over the American heartland is particularly significant because that is not a training exercise. That is an aircraft staying airborne, cycling over U.S. territory, maintaining continuous communication access with the nuclear submarine fleet hiding beneath the ocean. The U.S. military was not just sending a message to Tehran, it was preparing its own fail-safe infrastructure. The infrastructure that only gets fully activated when someone in the Pentagon is seriously thinking about what happens if this gets worse. The E-6B Mercury is built to survive an electromagnetic pulse, the kind of pulse that a nuclear detonation at high altitude would generate, a pulse that would fry every unprotected electronic system across thousands of miles. The fact that this aircraft exists is itself a statement about how the United States thinks about nuclear war, not as something impossible, but as something that must be managed even in its worst-case aftermath. Its primary role allows it to communicate with nuclear submarines by unspooling a 5-mile-long antenna, and it can remotely fire land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles directly from the air. This aircraft carries the specific command authority required to initiate a nuclear response from thousands of feet above the Earth, a response that could be ordered even if Washington, D.C. no longer existed. The fact that it is now operating in the theater of an active war, where a new and more hardline Iranian supreme leader is sitting on a stockpile of near-weapons-grade uranium, is something that deserves your full and undivided attention. Deployments of the E-6B outside U.S. airspace or routine training areas are uncommon and often signal heightened strategic readiness or deterrence messaging. The analysts who track these things for a living are careful to say that the deployment does not automatically indicate imminent nuclear use, and that is an important distinction to make. But it is also an important distinction to not hide behind, because the United States does not put its nuclear command and control aircraft into a live war zone simply as a matter of routine. It does so when the people making decisions at the highest levels of the U.S. government believe they need that infrastructure available, ready, and airborne. The question is not whether nuclear war is about to begin tonight. The question is, and this is the question that every American deserves to sit with seriously, why does the United States government believe it needs its nuclear management platform flying over the Persian Gulf during a conventional war with a country that still holds enriched uranium and just appointed its most hardline leader in modern history? That question does not have a reassuring answer, and the people telling you not to worry about it are not the ones flying that plane.